It's easy to feel overwhelmed, whether we're talking about big data or big teams or big projects, and so you can't help but think, one, where is all the data going to be stored in the future? Institution by institution, organization by organization. I guess what I would like to do is, we've heard about the applications that go all the way from the challenges with construction and agriculture and the biggest parts of the economy and maybe the least advanced, all the way down to the humanitarian purposes that we talked about. I liked the references to change merchants, and so we think about the role that people play. We've heard a lot about the technological challenges that are out there, crowdsourcing and the role that that can bring to just more maybe global transparency. And then lastly, these the linkages, the citizen involvement for sure, that Amar, you talked about, and then lastly, Ramon, about still the need to bridge how we traditionally look at information to the future. Before we open it up to the audience for any specific questions, I guess I would like to just ask each speaker, could you just take a minute or two to say what you think may be the one biggest challenge or obstacle is that we as maybe a community have got to overcome, or maybe your individual institution has got to overcome, to maybe to be a game changer, to actually get to the point where you think we would have arrived. I guess that's the best way to characterize it. And so the other way you can look at it is maybe what's the one greatest opportunity also. So a big challenge and the greatest opportunity or the greatest payoff if we could overcome that challenge. And it could be political, it could be governance, it could be people, it could be technological. Doesn't matter, let you choose that. And then that'll give the audience some time to think about a question that they want to ask you. And again, we can go in order, Ray, or we can go whoever wants to start.
Sure. Yeah, probably the biggest challenge that we look at is, as I mentioned in the speech, is, when you develop technology that can increase productivity exponentially and save massive amounts of money, and the adoption rate is slow, the only reason for that is that people don't understand. And you don't have the resources in order to necessarily teach people how to apply that technology into the workflow of their projects. And that's probably one of the biggest challenges, is the educational process required. And in many cases, the approvals and sometimes government regulations and rules that in some places have a tendency to be more difficult to change than in others. You see the adoption of the technology we provide is very fast in places like the US, where rules can change very quickly, and in places like Japan, which is where our parent company is, but the rules and regulations change very slowly. And they're a very technologically advanced country, but with regards to changing how they do things, it can be very slow. So that would be on the challenge side. The other one was, what's the biggest opportunity? The biggest opportunity that I see for our industry, and I think all of us would say it, is the massive amounts of computing power, cloud-based capabilities, the ability to store data. It's revolutionary what's gone on in the last 10 years, and it is changing this entire industry. This industry, with the ability to have upload speeds and download speeds and collect data and manage data and all the sensors that are available, is just massive to the industry, and you're going to see the ability to educate people and share information. I think Anmar said it very well about, information. You shouldn't have to call a department to get information. Information should be free, not in the sense of giving it away for free, but that it is available for people. And I think the technology that's allowing that to be created, whether it be the Googles or the Facebooks or the Apples and the iPhones, but they're really creating that capability for our industry that's massive. So that'd be my two. Is that?
Okay, is this one working? Yeah. Well, so first of all, I'd like to go back to what has been referenced by multiple people, which is the importance of quality infrastructure. So if we wouldn't have a good infrastructure, what is humankind without infrastructure? We would become cavemen, cavewomen, right? If you don't have electricity, if you don't have roads, if you don't have buildings, you don't have houses, we're back to prehistoric environment. So it is very important for all of us to realize what a beautiful business we are in by being able to improve infrastructure, because that's directly related to improving the quality of life. So I think that's pretty close to humanity and what we can mean to everyone. So if you look at where we sit, the amount of information that is being collected is vast. It is humongous. And now the amount of people that can principally consume information. So we've talked about consumerization, or we sometimes say Amazonification, right? Where you can just order anything online, get information any way you want it, is adding a huge dimension to the quality of life. The part that interests me tremendously is the management of infrastructure information that sits in the middle. If information is unorganized information and it's not properly structured and managed so that it can be consumed, then the outcome can be totally wrong because it's based on the wrong information. So the management of infrastructure information is very important, and in the world of GISers, where we sit, the first letter out of the G and I and the S that we need to drop is the S. Right? This is not about systems anymore. This is about geospatial information. And for geospatial information, the biggest value that we can add to other disciplines is to put it with 2 feet on the ground, to give it a location. And whether you talk about assets, whether you talk about people, whether you talk about infrastructure, land masses, etc., being able to relate things to location is a fantastic place to be. So that's the second thing that I'm very enthusiastic about, is that it indeed does not always require an expert to consume spatial information. It does require a different level of expertise to manage spatial information. So for me, the challenge, and where there's a lot to be done in the future still, is properly managed information so that it's structured and put ready for consumability. Okay.
I think we've all kind of touched on very similar themes here. From my perspective, the biggest challenge that we currently still face is effectively mining or exploiting or extracting the information that comes from all this big data. Again, I look at it from my perspective of remote sensing and that time machine that I talked about before. My great frustration is what happens if in one of those 4 billion square kilometers worth of data, there's something that is truly pivotal that nobody's ever seen on this earth. But we've already recorded it, and it may have happened 10 years ago. You know, I think that's part of what I want to start seeing happening from a technology development, from a tradecraft perspective, from using people to find out all those things that we've already recorded to make us better prepared for the future. And in terms of the opportunity, again, I kind of spoke to it in my previous conversation. We have to make this more simple for people. I think we've all done a very good job of selling to ourselves, of trading and exchanging information within our own industries. But what about all those other folks and the companies and the businesses that are not part of our industry? That's really where I think the future lies. And we We can't be so enamored with our own technology that we don't think about how people who aren't like us will use it. And I think we're getting there. I think we have some of the great signs of advancement in each of our respective parts, but we still clearly have a long ways to go.
So I'll build on what my colleagues said. I agree with a lot of the challenges and opportunities that have been described so far. What I'd add to that is, I think on the challenge side, one of the issues we are going to wrestle with is this tension between privacy and ubiquity. Because, you have all this information that is being made available, and you always get into this tension of, how much should be shared, and, that leads to legislative challenges or social pressures, all these kinds of things. And I think it's a thorny issue. We all appreciate sometimes, knowing what's going on, and at other times it creeps us out that somebody knows something about what's going on in our world. I actually wanted to ask Steve, I've been missing a bicycle in my house, and I wonder if his satellite can pick it up. But, it's one of those, so I think, that's one of the, I think a big challenge that going forward that we have to wrestle with is there's so much information coming out. How do you draw the line between what should be shared with the world and what shouldn't be? And on the flip side, on the opportunity, I think the one other thing I'd add to what's been said is I just really think the next generation is where our opportunities lie. The kids of today that are coming, or the engineers who are in universities today, or the people that are starting to be analysts and things like that, I think we have a real opportunity with them to turn, the idea of location basically being a first-class citizen in the world of information. I think, so today so much of, I'm sure your kids or nephews or whoever, the young generation you interact with, if you told them that you grew up in a world where there was no Google or Wikipedia, they'd look at you like, what are you talking about? And so I think you want to add the ability for those folks to get their information, not just by typing, but just from the context of where they are. What is, I'm in Rotterdam, I haven't been here before, what do I need to know about the location that I'm in? I think that is a huge opportunity, and that informed citizenry, that informed engineer, that informed analyst will be will help us make a better world. I believe that's a big opportunity for us.
Yeah, I agree also that big data probably is the biggest challenge and opportunity. Let me put a couple of twists on this. The fact that big data contains all of the data is not really the issue. The issue is when you have different formats, tag and untag data, different sources of information. Really, how do you make sense out of it? So basically, how do you manage and structure data? This is really the issue. There's another component of this is basically not only you need to make sense of it, you need to make sense that really makes sense. Double thing, no? So right now, the human eye still is probably the most powerful device to identify trends, patterns. How do we automate this? This is also a big challenge that I think this industry has. Automatization or pattern recognition, again, to speed up decision making.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ramon. Well, I guess a couple things in terms of terminology. When we use words like point clouds, although I think most people would say, isn't that an oxymoron? But maybe we could get the young kids back at the table with our augmented reality terminology that you use, Ted. And if Chris Tucker is in the audience, although I probably can't quote him directly, he would be giving us a hard time about the color of our hair up here on the stage and trying to bring young people back to the table in this particular field. Listen, let's open it up for questions from the audience. And it might be a little bit hard. Yep. And
fantastic presentation. I think you can make the case that GPS probably had more impact on everybody's life over the last few years. And if you look at GPS, radar, and so on, a lot of these things came out of the military. So the question I have is, in the future, is it going to be the same thing where the really huge innovations that impact everybody? Are they going to come out of military, or are they going to come out of the commercial sector or government, or where?
I don't know. I guess we can all jump in on that. The military has a much bigger budget than our private companies. That's probably part of the reason that a lot of stuff comes out of the military. I think, just from my own personal perspective, there are certain core technologies that get developed, such as GPS, that no individual company could ever afford to do, and those are never going to stop as the military has the wherewithal to do that level of R&D and development. But I think individual companies will continue to invent and develop core competencies in their own specific areas. And if that is using military technology or extensions of that has yet to be seen. But I think you'll see it from both sides.
I'd like to take a different angle at that. I think military is the older, hardcore R&D type approach that have big budgets and deep pockets and what have you. But look at who the biggest companies are in the world today. You talk about Google and Facebook and what have you. Those are the richest company, and their richness has not come from the military. Their richness has come from social demand. And I think that's the new world. Companies that didn't exist 10 years ago are the biggest companies in the world today in a couple of years' time. So I think social demand is going to drive requirements in the marketplace much more than historically what the defense sector did.
I'll chime in very briefly as well. I think GPS and commercial satellite imagery are both fantastic examples of this evolution and almost a venture capitalist that has happened from the military getting into the commercial sector. But ultimately, I think some of the experiences that I've gone through in the past couple of years of having served military and intelligence customers around the world, and the insatiable demand and the need for speed and all of those things that have happened. Frankly, when I started working on Wall Street and talking with business firms, the need and the demands that they had were even faster than what I had experienced in the defense and the intelligence world. And so I see some of this as the technology may be seeded or invested at the very early stages of our product life cycles, but really the innovation and the speed of the next step, I think, is going to come from the commercial world.
So not to pile on, but I would tend to agree. I think there is a continued source of innovation coming out from the military and defense sector. I think you all read about drones today, and the application of what was military technology now showing up in commercial or everyday applications for agriculture and other things. So that vector is going to continue. I think just like Ted was saying that there are these other things that have shown up, and I think right now, if you think of retail or online commerce, that has been a very big driver of innovation. Now, if 15 years ago, Amazon did not exist, and just look at not just the fact that it exists as a website, but if you think of all the things that it has created as a result of trying to do online commerce today, that's a significant contributor now to innovation. When you look at Google, you look at something called Hadoop that has come out of Yahoo and Facebook because they're dealing with huge amounts of data. Those are the kinds of innovations that I think are going to come out of the commercial sector. So I think we're going to see a combination of the two going forward.
One thing I would like to distinguish is the companies that drive infrastructure are not necessarily the ones that extract the value. So to drive infrastructure, which is a very heavy R&D investment, basically the companies that do this is the ones that have the deep pockets, and military is obviously one of it. But usually, and there's many examples, the ones that are the first and doing the infrastructure are not the ones that extract the high value. The highest value is done by people that really understand the needs, the trends of the people, the social trends, and do solutions on top of this infrastructure. These are the ones that extract the value.
Let's see, Trevor Fraser, sorry. Yep.
Thank you, Barbara. Fraser Taylor from Canada. A very fascinating group of presentations. I think in managing information and infrastructure, there are two issues that I would like to ask the panel's opinion on. If you manage information and infrastructure properly, you have to give thought in the whole process to two things. How do I maintain and preserve over time what is vitally important in order to look at change over time, given the size and scale and increasing volume of information that's coming in? How do we archive and preserve, or even should we archive and preserve? And secondly, one of the speakers at least touched on the issue of privacy, but there are a whole number of other legal and ethical issues: intellectual property, ownership, control of data, which need to be considered, particularly if you're moving into a socially driven marketplace. So I pose these two questions and would appreciate any comments that any of the panelists have. Thank you.
Can I? Yeah, so two quite different questions, but first of all, the management of information, and I'm going to think back to the Crossrail project in the UK, where it's a fascinating project if you dive deeper in the amount of data that they collect, because they have this historic awareness that they're going to dig tunnels underneath a centuries-old city, and they're going to collect data that they're never going to collect again, or certainly not in their lifetime. So they might be drilling through archaeological sites or through wastewater systems that they didn't know that they were there, etc., etc. And so the amount of data collected up front is huge, and it's quite unique that the government of England decided, or the City of London decided, that they did not want to waste any data, because once you throw it away, it's never going to come back. So they've decided quite deliberately to take a very coarse approach to collecting everything and deciding what to consume at a later stage. And as they go through the cycles of the process, the amount of data and the type of data and the information extracted from the data that they need during design and construction is very different data than the data that they need at a later stage of the project. So they have got this phased approach where they define their information model and take a subset of the information that they need at that particular phase of the project. And there might be data that is not needed for construction, but that's later needed for conservation or for operational purposes. And there might be data that is used for construction, which is only useful for construction and which you don't need at a later stage. So I believe data is one of the most valuable, that's probably the most expensive thing you have in your system. The data is the most expensive item. So I think many organizations will be very careful not to toss out data, but to come out with smarter ways of how to filter data and how to represent only that part that helps you go from data to information, right? To enrich the data so that you can make decisions, which then subsequently gets into the, okay, but if you collect so much data, what are you going to share with whom? And what about the privacy and intellectual property and what have you? Obviously a fascinating field. So I'll start with I guess with a comment that might upset the apple cart a little bit. And that is that consumerization is going to overtake that totally. It's quite scary, but if you think of people walking around with iPads or Androids or iPhones or what have you, they totally, well, and I say they, I've got one of them here in my pocket, of course, and so do you. So us and we combine work information with private information as we've never done before. It all sits on the same device. We all expect it to be there at our fingertips and that it gets distributed. So what information is available for whom? And can they read and interpret the data and interpret it on its values and not misinterpret it, which would result to wrong decisions with maybe the right data but wrong decisions, is a fascinating field that goes back to the importance of managing the information in a way that you can be decisive of what you distribute for what purpose and what you don't choose to distribute. And it sits on the edge of the blade where I genuinely and truly hope that the world and the governments and the standards and the protection are not going to prevent consumption. That would really be a pity if consumption of information would be prevented. But that's not the same as asking for anarchy. And if you want to avoid anarchy, then you're going to have to do something by making that information manageable and distributable and having track record on who is using what data for what purpose. Look at the Boston bombing. The social help has been humongous, has really helped solving the issues. At the same time, it's scary if you see how much information there is and having to take the decision on a split second of what you throw into the interpretation or into the decision process of who gets to see what. So it's on the edge of that blade. There's two sides of the coin, but progress is only going to happen if the world takes a more liberal approach to the reuse of information.
The only thing I'd add to what Ted said, I agree with his point of view. One, I think on the whole about, what do you do with all the data that you generate, I think at the risk of sounding geeky, I think instead of managing, the issue is really going to become about analysis. I mean, I really think it's going to be about coming up with a smarter algorithm or relevancy in understanding which data is more useful as opposed to which data is not more useful. And you think about the way you search the web today, information is not being thrown away, but there's relevancy algorithms that figure out what's most useful to you. So I think that we're going to change the conversation on data from managing to something else. On the privacy side, I think that, look, I'm not a legal expert. I mean, there's going to be lots of opinions. I think we could stay here all day arguing about how much information should be shared. But we are already in a world where we have less privacy than we think. And all of us who are sort of the people who consume that information, actually we need to engage the users in a different dialogue. Right now I think people appreciate transparency, they appreciate control. I think what happens with privacy is that if you're not explicit with somebody and say, here's what we know about you and here are the things that you could shut off, if you're not able to do things like that, then users are going to revolt with you or your citizens are going to revolt. We have to be able to provide greater amount of control as well as a greater amount of benefit, because right now, think about all the privacy arguments. People use information not for the benefit of the user. They generally use it to, send you advertising or spam. They're not doing it for you, really. They're doing it for themselves. We need to change that equation. And I think if we do that, people will be willing to be more open in terms of letting you handle more information on their behalf.
Just a piece to add on this one, on the amount of data. My advice, never delete anything. So if you remember 10 years ago, your inbox, you spent a lot of time deleting mails because of two reasons. You didn't have memory capacity and you don't have search engines. Now I don't never delete an email because, again, search engines is, and going back to the data, now the cost of a stored terabyte is going down, not year on year, it's month on month. One. And as we talked before on the first intervention, the unstructured data analysis engines are evolving like crazy. So I was looking the other day at one demo of autonomy software that HP bought years ago. It's magic, really. It's unbelievable what these softwares are able to make sense out of totally unstructured data. So time will come. These softwares that make sense of a big data will be more and more affordable. So don't delete anything.
I think Fraser will probably like that response only because one person's noise is another person's signal, and so you never know what that data might do. Lawrence.
Well, first of all, I think I'm going to forward all my emails to you so you can store them for me. I appreciate the panel and really looking at the business opportunities and the work with national development in some cases, especially infrastructure, and really supporting customers with change. Some referring to monitoring it today, some looking at projecting alternatives. The topic I wanted to address was climate change and adaptation to climate change and relative to your customers. I found it quite interesting that no one on the panel mentioned climate in the context of change, but certainly when it comes to infrastructure issues, that climate is going to be a factor in that. Also, for those companies that are working in the U.S., the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission issued guidelines a few years ago for companies to address and include climate change risks in their financial disclosures. And so the question is, I wanted to get your thoughts relative to change and relative to climate issues, and what opportunities you see for supporting your customers to use geospatial data, including civil satellite observations, to help them address climate change risks, as well as what observations or modeling capabilities you're currently using or would like to use to support them in that.
So I'll go ahead and start that. Again, as part of what my whole philosophy has been as this time machine of the Earth, I think it very well correlates to the subject of climate change. Being able to document. In fact, I think just last week, Google, along with USGS, just had a cooperative arrangement called time-lapse. It's very similar to what I was showing you of the island in the Persian Gulf that's been changing, but on a more macro and a more global scale, using, again, USGS imagery and using computing capabilities to start showing how glaciers may have changed or how an area may have become more desert in environmental changes that are impacting people all over the world. I think that is a rich source of data that we've already collected. We just haven't analyzed it fully. From my own company's perspective, we've worked with environmentalists around the world. One of the notable scientists, his name is James Baylog. He actually lives pretty close to our corporate headquarters in Colorado, and he's been using a series of handheld photographs and cameras to, again, be documenting how the Earth and the glaciers in particular in the Northern Hemisphere have been retreating. We then correlate it using our satellite imagery with this time series of measurements as a way of, again, kind of getting that message out and being able to explain it. We've also been using remote sensing data to look at carbon and the whole carbon trading initiatives and things like that that have been happening around the world. So I think there is a rich beginnings to it, but by all means, we're not anywhere close to really, truly using all the data that's out there.
Yeah, so maybe as a point of interest, I was last week in Washington at a CIO event, and calamities was on the agenda of the CIOs. And in the discussion with those CIOs, the discussion talked about calamities that happen to you, which, let's say, internal calamities that can be the result of a climate. This was, amongst others, was the East Coast storm that was discussed, and that created a lot of downtime and, starting from how do you know if all your employees are okay, all the way to how do we continue our project because we have a customer that sits in a different part of the world. Projects are global these days, and they really feel sorry that you just had a storm, but they still have their project and they still want the project to be delivered on time. And so how do you recover from calamity inside your organization? And how most of those CIOs were representing the world's leading engineering firms, global engineering firms, and so how can you as an engineering firm help recover after a calamity? So I know that sits on the back end of a climate change. It's in the business that we do, it's hard to influence the front end of the climate change, right? We can't stop storms or floods to happen. But I think there's a very noble task to do to get better and better at restoring the infrastructure that was there before the calamity happened. And it goes back to I guess our Ramon mentioned don't ever delete anything. I would add to that, don't ever keep everything in one place. If you're going to keep everything, then you might as well organize it. You don't keep it in one place. So it's very important, whether you do cloud storage or whether you've got off-site backup systems or what have you, but make sure that you have a recovery plan, which is not just recovering your data, it's recovering your operational information, it is recovering your productivity, and it's ultimately recovering the infrastructure, because I think that defines the depth of a calamity is how quickly households, people's lives are back up and running, and they can go back to school and back to work, and the electricity works again, etc. So a big part of the calamity obviously happens after the flood happened or after the storm happened. How long does it take before I'm back home?
So I want to thank you for asking that question and bringing the climate change topic, up to the fore. And you're right, we're guilty of not having mentioned that explicitly. But it's true that I think, we all think about it a lot and plan for how we can help with that situation. I mean, I think there's all this recording and education and sharing of what is going on today that many people are directly contributing to. Where I think companies like mine can play a role is in modifying what exists today or what is being built. And, the idea of making energy calculations a, ubiquitous and easy to carry out kind of operation when people are designing buildings, or, understand material consumption, because, there are two sides to this, to the climate change equation that buildings and infrastructure directly contribute to. One is in the amount of energy they consume. And so what we are trying to do there is, just to make this a shortcut, we're trying to make energy work inside modeling applications the way spell checking works inside word processing. That really, you shouldn't have to be a specialist in order to compute the footprint that you have with regard to your building. And moreover, just like in spelling, the computer should be able to suggest alternatives for you in order to create a better piece of infrastructure. Because we know where the building lies, we can calculate the arc of the sun, we can calculate all the climate conditions that exist in that location, and there's a lot of convenience we can bring to making those decisions. So that's the first thing I think we are very focused on. The second thing is, it's a real crime, and it's often forgotten, that 30% of the amount of materials ordered for construction are generally thrown in the landfill. And you talk about climate change and how you pollute environments, the ability for people who are participating in infrastructure projects or building projects to accurately predict how much material they need, of course, select better materials, and then sequence them in a way that doesn't cause waste can be an enormous benefit to the whole equation that we're dealing with. We're going to stop polluting the earth. And again, I think modeling applications can do a much better job of predicting and helping people plan those things and reduce the amount of waste that gets carried out. So those two problems, I think we are absolutely mainlining in the kinds of applications we build.
I couldn't tell. Well, listen, we're running a little bit late. Each of the panelists would be around, I'm sure, during the coffee break if you have specific questions and comments. I think we have a small token of appreciation to extend to each of the panelists. And maybe while we're doing that, each of you could, again, join me in giving them a round of applause for their presentations.
Barbara, I would request you to extend the token of appreciation to the speakers. Sarah, please. Ray O'Connor. Mr. Ted Lambu. Mr. Stephen Wood. Mr. Amar Hanspal. Mr. Ramon Pastor. I would now request Ms. Anu Negi to please come on stage and hand over the token of appreciation to the chairperson. Thank you, Anu. I thank Ms. Barbara for conducting an interesting and interactive session